Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grit Files. I am your hostess, Loralyn Mears. And in the house today, we've got Michael Noring. He is the CEO of GCSIT, a highly advanced company focused on digital transformation, cloud efforts, assessments, this kinds of thing, bringing forward a new kind of engineering to focus the technology on where it's needed most, embracing agile development, all of that sort of good stuff. And last year, GCSIT was named as one of the top 50 smartest companies. So how about that? We've got the CEO here with us, Michael Noring, talking us about what makes his company so smart. Hey, Michael.
Hi, how are you?
I am good, thank you. I've been excited about this podcast coming up because I've been in the IT side for a long time myself. And I'm curious to understand, and I'm sure our listeners are, what you're seeing with respect to the trends. We've seen digital transformation, how the onset of the pandemic really forced banking and other industries that were kind of laggards with respect to digital transformation adoption. What's going on? Like, what is happening? What's trending? Where do people go next? I mean, is it all about Forge from here and Atlassian? Is it dropping Connect? So let's get into it. Maybe give us a little bit of a spiel first on what makes GCSIT unique and share that with our audience.
Sure. I think probably as you called out, the biggest thing we're seeing as part of the digital transformation is really an understanding that customers are getting a lot more aware around the value that they're being provided with. And specifically, they look everything from what is the competition doing to you, and how do they actually choose who they're going to do business with. And so what we're seeing is a lot of traditional businesses that have traditionally not invested a lot in IT, all of a sudden have to start thinking about technology as the way of doing business. It's a little bit of your technology strategy is becoming your business strategy. So that's probably the biggest driver we're seeing, and every industry is different, right? I mean, in banking, they want to deal, with interaction with your customers from different financial vehicles. In healthcare, they want to have a very different kind of experience and access to information. And we've been dealing with, state and local, where they're trying to figure out how they work better with kind of the constituents. So it's a really broad gamut that we're seeing. But probably the biggest thing is this conversion from IT as a back office function that keeps the lights on and our email flowing to they're now having to be an integral part of delivering value to our customers, or we really risk kind of losing market share. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we're seeing a transformation of today. We've had a lot in the last decade, organizations that are really kind of larger, deep pockets being innovative. But now what you have is that early majority that are all having to catch up in order to innovate for their customers. And that's really the biggest thing we're seeing.
Is it fair to say that one of the, I guess, perhaps most common steps that we've seen last year with respect to adoption of technology are the companies who had the brick and mortar, the retail, that suddenly had to embrace e-commerce full on, or they were going to disappear? Is that a good example for our audience to understand part of digital transformation, or is that not regarded as the same thing?
No, I think it's very much the same thing. I think there was definitely a forcing function that was created with kind of lockdowns and restrictions and where you could eat and where you could actually go. We also saw a complete change in the way the workforce was engaging, right? They were basically being told that they don't have to be in the office, they can work from home, and we had to just make it work. And so digital transformation has become customers who can be anywhere, that you have to engage with employees that can pretty much be everywhere. And they want to get access to all the information and all the stuff that they've gotten in the past. They want to be able to do that digitally. I mean, as easy as looking at, I want to be able to order my food from my phone, regardless of whether or not the restaurant or the grocery store has that kind of ability. That's my demand nowadays. And that's not going away. It's just we had to learn how to work that way. So it became the kind of the forcing function. So yeah, it is exactly those types of things. How do I now engage from an e-commerce perspective? How do I now deliver more value beyond that? I'm just providing, a gadget of some sort, but how does that gadget connect to everything else? It really is kind of a new way of doing business. And without the technology, you would still be in the brick and mortar and you would still be kind of stuck within those parameters. But yeah, this is a very good example you gave.
And I guess where it used to be said that innovation was the mother of necessity, maybe now we can almost go to the place where technology, perhaps it's the father of necessity, right? Not to get patriarchal or anything and play all that gender stuff, but you've got to embrace it. And so talk to us. I am sure our audience will have a lot of questions in and around the area of the cloud. There's been so much fear, even at the start of the pandemic, where people were losing their minds because they didn't realize they were recording their Zoom calls, being neophytes on the platform, right up in the cloud. And then people were saying, hey, I heard that conversation of you talking about your business with Michael Noring and, talking about everything that we're doing and our whole strategy for what's next. And yeah, I found it on the cloud. So people were completely freaked out. Talk to us about how now, I guess, with cloud and partitioning, and you've got everything from private cloud to you've also got some of the hybrid clouds, because everything's going hybrid, right? Asynchronous learning, hell no. Part of it in the classroom, make it blended too, right? Everything's hybrid. Work, no, don't stay home all the time. Come into the office sometimes. Talk to us about the cloud, and that's the evolution of the cloud over the last couple of years and where it's headed. I think that'll be a really interesting insights for our audience.
Of course. So first of all, there's a lot of words to describe a lot of the same things. You'll hear hypercloud, you'll hear multi-cloud, and then just cloud in general. But ultimately what it comes down to is that we need to provide access beyond our traditional, organizational barriers, right? And so if we kind of go back to the brick and mortar, I would have my brick and mortar, I would have my data center, and that data center would serve up my brick and mortar. The reality is, in order for me to deliver application innovation faster, I have to split where my applications are coming from. So some applications are SaaS-based. Some of those applications may be a third party that's stitched in with some other innovation that I have. So the reality is that whether or not you have what we call public cloud footprint or even a data center, the reality is you're pulling so many different aspects that are spread out across the internet or really the cloud in order to really engage. So when you look at, what is going on in organizations, it's really a drive to innovate more than anything else. So how do I actually leverage and stitch all these together into a meaningful whole? When we now look at the traditional data center versus what's called the public cloud, it's really about how do I accelerate traditional applications that was meant for, let's say, a staff of 500 people internally. How do I now scale it up to 10,000 customers logging in every single day and checking their balance? Those applications weren't built for it. So you have now an ability to go out and scale that infrastructure into the public cloud where it's pretty much scaling on demand, and depending upon the volumes you're getting can scale up and down, and it's utility pricing. So I only pay for what I use. So that mix of the utility pricing is ultimately was allowing me to innovate. It also allowing me to stitch together components that are way past my organizational boundaries that traditionally exist. And then you also will hear things people talk about private cloud, which really means that the way I built traditional applications in my data center has to change as well. And so I ultimately have to figure out in my data center, how do I now build it out in such a way that some of the internal applications can actually scale fairly quickly and be accessible to outside parties. So for example, I work with an organization where they had built a fantastic e-commerce site, and then all of a sudden Black Friday happened, and you basically had their procurement systems that were sitting inside their data centers collapse under their feet. And that cost a couple of hours worth of outage. And when you're an e-commerce site where this is your most profitable day, of the year, that's a huge problem. And so they're recognizing now that you also have to take your internal infrastructure and cloudify it, so to speak. That's why they call it private cloud. So it can work in conjunction with all the other cloud components out there. So it's all about scalability, speed of innovation. It's about keeping the cost under control. It's not saving me money putting things out, but it's saving me money in how I'm innovating and scaling out. And that's ultimately where the cloud really kind of builds its value from the ground up.
Now, you mentioned data centers a couple of times. So as a gal who has walked through very, very large data centers at Sun Microsystems, Oracle, IBM, all kinds of fun places like that, with the nice sound of the incessant hum and then the heat, the whole thing. With your business focused on managed services as one of the things that you provide, is the management of the data center, especially at the client level, kind of going by the way of the dinosaur?
I think it eventually it will, but it is a long period of time. People have invested into the data centers. They have a lot of applications that are running in the data center, and those applications have really long life cycles associated with it. That's going to be around for a long time. No question around it, but they have to structure it a little bit differently than they've done in the past. They really are using the cloud, as what we're seeing the majority of organizations we work with, to kind of accelerate and scale out to that new customer audience and the new value that they're providing. And then they're taking some core functions and saying, how do we convert that from a data center into, let's say, a SaaS solution so we don't have to manage it anymore? So we have to think about what is really the value for an organization. It's not management of just core infrastructure. It's about delivering value to customers. So in many cases, they look for organizations like ours to say, take this management function off our hands so our individuals can really work and focus on delivering value and innovating as opposed to keeping the lights on, right? But the data center is going to be around for a long time, but it has to innovate in conjunction with everything else. And so, one of the things that I think we are very, a little bit different as an organization is we really focus not just on we're going to go solve cloud problems or we're going to solve data center problems. It's we're going to solve the problems of how all these things stitch together and how they are secure, reliable, scalable, cost effective. And, you can manage from a kind of common operational model. And so the approach you have to take across all of this is very, very different than if you just focus on one entity by itself.
Your last couple of statements cue me up nicely for the next question. So given your efforts too in and around DevOps and with the new Atlassian Forge as an improvement over Connect, are there all kinds of opportunities now to provide those new services since they're being all hosted in the Atlassian cloud that enable faster speed of development, enhanced security? Is that something is maybe the next evolution that clients have to start looking for to do now that they've actually moved some of their applications on the cloud, now to get them a little bit more organized, as you said, stitched together in a more coordinated way?
So that's really a trick question. So absolutely, right? However, there's also the reality. The reality is that most organizations are not structured for change. Most organizations are structured for very slow-moving, ITIL-based processes where we ensure that decisions are slow. And what you're seeing as kind of the first part of those organizations are trying to just come to terms with agile development and what that means. Now, all the automations, when you look at it, it does increase speed. It increases your security posture. It increases your ability to scale out in different components. It allows your resources to do a lot more than they can originally. It reduces errors. It does all those great things. And if you look at the leading edge organizations, they are adopting a lot of those practices. But the reality is the majority of organizations out there are still coming to terms with how do I move from waterfall and ITIL-based operations to agile development and delivering agile infrastructures. So where we really come in is we help them on that journey along the spectrum of it. Honestly, the automation is absolutely key in many different respects, but it's not full DevOps for most organizations. Most organizations are more of how do I just automate the code to stand up a infrastructure, for example. So I wholeheartedly believe where everyone's going to end up in the end that wants to innovate and survive is in a very DevOps type world where automation and CI/CD becomes kind of part of the nature of the business. But that being said, it is the leaders in the industry that is doing that at an accomplished rate. And really what we do as an organization is we help people get closer and closer to that reality every single day.
Now let's step away from a bit of the tech talk into the grid files, all of the gritty stuff that goes on. So you're the CEO of a company that gets into some pretty thorny situations with respect to the digital efforts that are needed, some of the security in the cloud, not in the cloud, being able to go in and even, you talked about DevOps through Atlassian Connect and be able to punch into somebody else's database, just the way that it's set up, if you can string together the right workflow, thorny stuff. Mm-hmm. Turn it around. You're the CEO. Tell us what's been very challenging for you and how you've overcome it. So really the gritty side of being the leader of a business. Talk to us about those experiences.
So I think probably some of the biggest things for me is I've made a career out of both kind of turnarounds, organizations, or really going in and getting organizations to work at the best of the ability. And the types of issues you run into is the same ones we run into in IT projects and whenever we try to innovate, which has a lot to do with change management. It has to do with winning hearts and minds. It has to do with getting people committed to work on new things and getting them outside their comfort zone. The pace in which we have to change as organizations to be successful, whether it's mine or whether it's another organization that we work with, is pretty much the same. But it's about winning hearts and minds. It's about getting the best out of individuals that are working and really unleashing their full potential. And honestly, in many cases, that's not necessarily the organizational culture that exists in a lot of organizations. So that's really where the rubber hits the road for someone like myself. It's how do you win the hearts and minds? And I'm very, very proud of our team. Our team is a phenomenal team. They have really embraced a lot of the changes that we've done over the last 3 years, for example, and has really accelerated our business in many different ways. And that very culture of change is something that we've become really, really good and adept at bringing into other organizations and teaching them what it's like to go through it. But that's really, if you look at it from my perspective and at my level, really the change management, winning hearts and minds, and getting people committed to the process is probably the hardest problem to solve of all.
And what's all that like now, given the great resignation to the great boomerang to the great rethink, right? All of this back and forth where people have been reevaluating what it is that they want. You're seeing a huge path towards independence where people are pursuing careers as solopreneurs, freelancers, giggers, whatnot, or entrepreneurs and setting up startups. So talk to us about some of the tactics that you're taking to win over the hearts and minds, not only of your clients, of course, but internally in your staff pool, trying to drive those adoptions of changes and things that are needed to keep up with client demand, as well as the changes that we're all experiencing in society with respect to norms and what is or what is not going to be tolerated within human resources and corporate culture.
So I think probably the biggest thing, and it goes back to the change management, is without setting the right culture and without setting a culture that people actually love working here, you're simply not going to be able to hold on to your very best resources. You have to set a culture where people feel not only that they're valued, but they understand that they're an extremely important part of the team. We set very specific goals in terms of our culture. We're very specific when we put it in place. We have what's called a no blame culture. So it's about people trying, it's about people standing up and being accounted for, but also not being held to task when they make a mistake. Right? We're there to support each other. We have something very importantly internally we call, no one fails alone. And it basically calls out that if you feel like you're stuck or you feel like you're not getting there, raise your hand. Everyone's going to come in and support you. So it's very team-based. The other one that's really, really important for anybody, specifically when we're working with engineers, is learning is everything. You want to learn as much as you can come across. As an engineer, they don't want to get caught in just working on one thing. So we have a concept we call learn, teach, serve, which is learn everything you come across so you can teach others and then serve them in their path of their greatness. And it just has created an environment where everybody supports each other. People here truly love working with each other. And it spills over into the customers. The customers are actually looking to us. And in many cases, even when we're recruiting, they're coming to us because they hear about people there are happy. Since when is anybody happy?
Right.
But it really is that if you bring out the very best in people and you ensure that the very, what they stand for is accounted for, it's amazing what you could actually do. And so it's not so much about me creating something or necessarily being the highest, paying organization out there, even though you do have to comp people fairly well. It's really about creating an environment we all want to be in. And if you do that, it will attract resources and it will also retain resources as well. And so far, I think we've done, a pretty good job of that. I think we're doing really well in terms of not only retaining the right people, but also attracting the right people. Despite the fact that I know there's a lot of challenges in the industry, which, I understand.
I love that. Learn, teach, serve. That's something I'll put in the podcast notes for sure. So in case anybody misses that part of the podcast recording, they'll have it there. Because I think that speaks volumes to the culture that most people are seeking but can't find.
Yep.
All right. What's your kryptonite, Michael? What takes you out at the knees?
Oh, my kryptonite. That's a very good question. I probably think the biggest thing, and I've kind of recognized it with myself a long time ago, is I feel like there is those individuals out there who are builders and those people who are operators. I'm somebody who builds. I'm somebody who loves doing out and getting the next challenge. If you throw a problem at me, I will do everything I can to solve it. But if all of a sudden you ask me to keep the lights on and, oil the squeaky wheel, I'm the worst operator on the planet. So I just kind of learned that about myself a long time ago, that, I need to keep motivating myself as part of the process and throwing new challenges. So that I would say is ultimately my kryptonite.
And what if I gave you an undo button? I said, Michael, you get to hit it once. Could be personally, could be professionally, something you'd want to undo. One hit. What do you change?
Honestly, that would call out that I didn't learn from any mistake I made. I actually love the fact that every mistake I made is something I've learned from and taken something away from. So I'm somebody who lives my life very much without regrets at any step of the way. And so I'm not really sure I have something that would undo, because it would unfortunately take a piece of me away from it in the process. That's kind of shaped me. So
do you think that ability to, I'll call it learn and forget, which isn't exactly correct because you're learning from it, but you're not letting it haunt you and going back. Like you said, you don't want to have regrets all the time. Do you think that's an essential recipe for success at your level?
I think it is an absolute critical part of the success. You cannot dwell in the past, because the past is not going to do anything, but you have to learn, and then you have to learn to get smarter next time around. I also think at the pace in which you have to work and the pace you have to focus, you have to be pretty much on at all times and always think about the next challenge and how to overcome it. You don't have time to feel sorry for yourself. Like, it just doesn't come with the job. So
Indeed, it does not. And now this next question really speaks to both the advice that you'd potentially want to share with others who are embracing this journey, but it also speaks to your goals and your mindset and what's next. So if I asked you and said, Michael, I'm about to introduce you. We're at this big, champagne gala in your honor. It's a toast, not a roast. And I'm going to say, Michael Noring is, or Michael Noring, what, ... What do you want those 8 to 10 words to say? What have you achieved? What are we celebrating?
So I actually think probably the biggest things is teams, the teams that I've been having the privilege of managing in the past, and getting the very best out of them. That is something that I probably pride myself more than anything. And I think probably the biggest compliment I've ever gotten is when, I have moved on or team members have moved on and I come across them again. I usually hear from them like, that was one of the best experiences I ever had. And that's something that I'll put in my pocket every single time. That's a great source of pride.
Oh, I love that. So we would say Michael Noring builds awesome teams. Right? Something like that?
Something like that. Well, sure, perfect. That's 8 words, but close enough.
Well, I'm the podcast host. I get to make up the rules, right? So it's like, that's not going to be 8 words. It's going to be 5 or 6, right? So all good. All right. Last question as we're wrapping things up. Now, this is a bit of a silly question, but it is my signature question for my podcast here. And we've been 3 years into this and asking the question. If we got a peek into your closet and we're looking at your footwear, describe the pair of shoes, boots, whatever it is, the footwear that personifies who you are. And why is that footwear? Why is it representative of your personality, your ethos?
That's easy. Hiking boots. And I think it's probably why it personifies me is because at the end of the day, for me, it's getting out in nature, but also getting out away from everything and taking a moment to just kind of take it all in without all the chaos that typically ensues in your life. So from my point of view, that's a really easy one. That's probably the biggest thing that I see in life is always get a chance to get out and do the things that you always make excuses of why you can't do them.
I love it. So with that, thank you very much here, our guest, Michael Noring, CEO of GCSIT. I'd like to say thank you for being on the Grit Files and giving us some interesting aspects of technology, digital transformation, cloud work, as well as giving our audience some great inspiration and insights into what it's like to manage and build teams and drive towards things that yield better results. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Don't forget to follow Grit Daily News as well as me, your host, Loralyn Mears, everywhere on social media. And how about throwing 4 or 5 stars our way if you're listening to Apple or Spotify? Subscribe to our show. And how about that fantastic intro by Touch Circle?